Welcome to the 30/30 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello everyone, super excited about the show today. For today's show, I am interviewing my dear friends, Luis Villaseñor and Tyler Cartwright from Ketogains, and we go into a deep dive on the importance of electrolytes for good health. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hello everyone, super excited to be here with two of my greatest friends in the health sphere, Luis and Tyler from Ketogains. Guys, how are you?
Hey, Guillermo, how are you? Are you drinking?
I'm actually...
What is this plebeian nonsense you're drinking? Hydrogen, and oxygen combined in an aqueous solution. Where's the electrolytes, man?
Dude, yeah, I'm waiting for my box. I was promised a box, and I still.
You're gonna get a box. You're actually gonna get a box at PaleoFX. So you'll have to come hang with us at our booth space. We got our booth assignment today, so we're excited.
Nice. It's so crazy because I was a tester back in Canada. I got to sip a little bit of this magic potion,
Yep.
And man, that shit's tasty.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it. We actually tweaked the formula a little bit after you tried it. We just really were not super comfortable with the erythritol, not so much that we didn't like it necessarily, but given some of the concerns that people have about non-natural sweeteners or some of the challenges with lab-made manufactured erythritol, we figured better safe than sorry, so we actually pulled it out, and so it's actually sweetened with stevia only now. So it's a little bit of a different flavor, but not substantially so.
We usually start this podcast with a hero story, and I think I'd like to ask you guys, what was the inception, or when did you guys realize that, holy shit, this is missing from these keto protocols? When did you guys discover that electrolytes were so important for people's keto flu?
Easy response is that the keto flu was, for the most part, something I rarely experienced myself. Of course, I did experience it when I first started keto, but the more I stayed on keto, there was something that I really didn't experience, and I did notice that people who actually ate more of a whole food-based diet that were not really restricting sodium and so on and so forth, actually were not really experiencing the keto flu. And you have Gatorade, and you have all of those isotonic electrolyte drinks that are for sports and performance, and very much because Ketogains in its inception is also much aligned with performance and health and strength training. Well, it just came about to be the natural pairing, right? And also because if you go and look at the actual, I'd say, Bibles on keto, the art and science of low carbohydrate performance or low carbohydrate dieting, or the classic the keto diet book by Lyle McDonald's, they put a lot of emphasis on being diligent with your electrolytes. And because those were the first books that I actually read, for me, it was a must. When you enter keto, you have to be very careful of your electrolyte intake, or you're going to have a bad time. And then you see lots of people who start the diet and say they feel awful, that they need carbs, that they don't have energy. And then you read also what the detractors of the ketogenic diet say, that you're going to feel bad, that you're going to not have energy, that is not sustainable. Well, the main reason, in my experience and from our clients, that I see that people drop out of keto outside of having a craving, it's because of electrolyte imbalances.
It's so interesting, that Gatorade story, that in the University of Florida, they created this electrolyte drink. And as soon as they implemented, they won the national championship. And then Miami incorporated that, and then they won the Super Bowl. And they had an unfair advantage for their electrolytes being replenished while they were sweating. Now, at that level, I want to dig into a couple of things. Rob has talked about this a lot, but can you guys explain why water loss is not necessarily that bad when you start a calorie deficit, and how important it is to replenish those electrolytes?
So I want to jump back to something you said really quickly when you talked about the University of Florida. I'm just going to raise my hand as an SEC football fan and say they probably had a little help on the recruiting trail as well, given they were put on probation, I think, not long after that for recruiting violations. But either way, it's a good story. I can't help but dig a little bit at that wound. But it's funny. People get really, really simple sometimes with explanations of things, and we have reduced hydration to just water. We have reduced the question of, are you dehydrated to here have water? And we don't realize that hydration is sort of an existential balance between the amount of electrolyte that's in circulation and in storage to the little amount that we actually can store it, and the amount of fluid that's coursing through the body, either in tissues themselves that can store fluids like water, or in circulation as part of your blood, right? So the body has a really, really adept and fine-tuned mechanism for regulating fluid retention, chiefly because the range between which you die and you live and you die, with respect to hyponatremia and hypernatremia specifically, but hypo and hyperkalemia is very similar, is really, really, really small. It's a pretty tight window to shoot that bullet through on a regular basis, without missing the mark. And missing the mark means you keel over and stop being upright and ambulatory, right? So when somebody actually goes on a lower carb diet, in whatever landscape we want to talk about that, when they just reduce their consumption of carbohydrate down, it doesn't necessarily have to be keto per se, or even really paleo per se, they tend to lower their circulating insulin levels. This is technically true even if your diet is almost all carbohydrate, but your consumption of total calories is very low as well. When that happens, something is affected. The circulating levels of insulin affect what's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. That's just a big fancy way of saying, hey, this is sort of the master switch for, among other things, fluid retention in the body. So absolutely, you're going to lose some fluid, in terms of what they call water weight loss at the outset of a ketogenic diet. Not only from that, but also from decreased hepatic glycogen storage. The water that's bound to glycogen is going to be excreted as well. But the problem is, what's that expression you medical people talk about? Water follows salt and salt follows water, or whatever it is. The idea here is, it's always funny how conveniently they'll point it in one direction but not the other, right? Depending on the point they're trying to make. But the issue is, if our answer to hydration is just chug more water, go drink a gallon of water a day for arbitrary reason, and you're not supplementing electrolytes, you can probably, in a diet where you're eating at or above your sort of daily need for calories, so you're at maintenance or even in a bulk or a surplus, your insulin levels are going to be raised to the point that it's probably not as big an issue. But if you're eating in a hypocaloric state, in a lower carb modality or milieu, you're begging for disaster with respect to electrolytes. And it's one of the reasons, like Luis said, that Lyle McDonald and Steve Finney and Jeff Volek and a lot of other researchers, including fearless partner and friend Rob Wolf in this conversation, has been screaming about electrolyte use for a long time. And it's funny, even in the midst of his pointing out how important it was, he came to a small conference we did in Vegas a few years ago, and he said, man, I love keto, but I just can't do it and do jujitsu. And we said, how are your electrolytes? He's like, I get plenty. And I was like, it's not really an answer. What do they look like? Oh, well, probably 6-7 grams a day. Well, that's not enough. Magically, he increases it. It only took him a year to listen to us. But after he started increasing, his performance improved, and he didn't have to start adding all those carbohydrates. So what was he doing adding those carbohydrates? It wasn't the carbs necessarily. It was increasing circulating insulin so that he secreted or excreted rather less electrolyte loss in the process. So he was preserving more sodium, preserving more potassium. So it's this funny thing where as with all things, there's context right in the middle of it, and people want to simplify things down. But I think it was Einstein who said, simplify things to their absolute simplest, but no simpler, or something around that expression. And unfortunately, when it comes to the story of electrolyte needs, we've so taken up pitchforks and torches against sodium that now we've thrown that baby out with the bathwater. And we don't think about, hey, what were they doing in the 1950s and the 1960s for electrolyte replenishment? They were taking salt capsules, about a handful. Hey, you had a cramp, eat salt. They literally had people filling salt into little plastic or into little like swallowable gel capsule type things, and in their locker rooms, and bringing them out and having players just popping them on the sidelines the whole time that they were out there on the field. The convenience factor of Gatorade was largely a convenience factor much more than it was actually the delivery mechanism for the electrolytes themselves.
Another thing is that we talked a little bit about the sweeteners, but glucose, you need a little bit of glucose in order to activate some of this glucose sodium pumps. So there's a little bit of that too, but not completely necessary.
So it's a funny thing. A lot of times people get really wrapped around the axle, and I've even seen some electrolyte products out there making the argument that you need 4 to 6 grams of glucose. And what they're really driving at largely is like SGLT1 transport. But what people don't really think about is that it is a glucose transporter that depends on sodium. It is not a sodium transporter that depends on glucose. They're linked collectively. But the reality is there is no physiologic need for any, and I'm using need very intentionally because I don't want people to walk away going, they said that there's no benefit to ever eating carbohydrate. That's not at all what we're saying. But what we are saying is there is no physiologic need, no requirement for exogenous consumption of glucose. Why? Because the body's going to produce its own glucose stores. You could argue that the partial portion of the increased need for electrolytes in keto may be because of decreased SGLT1 activity. But I got to be honest, I'm not really sold on what little clinical data there is out there really supporting the need for that 4 to 6 grams of sugar. And I'll tell you why I think a lot of companies will default to that, because sugar is hella cheaper than stevia or a proper erythritol or monk fruit extract. Buying satchels of sugar is dirt cheap, and it's a whole lot less of a difficult story to pitch in the modern, in the mainstream community that believes that, oh, you got to have sugar to train, you got to have sugar to recover, to say, oh, well, it's just, it's extra special Himalayan sugar or whatever. Like, we have to wrap a title around it so it sounds it's agave nectar or some other nonsensical term that's just another way of saying sugar, right? It's just cheap freaking sugar. So I really think that there is some degree of actually leaning on poor evidence to support a claim because it's convenient to the business model.
The first iteration of these electrolytes was your pickle juice magic potion. How'd you come up with that?
Actually, it wasn't pickle juice. It was more so the Ketogains coffee. I don't know, you remember it?
Yeah, with salt.
Yeah, basically that's it. What we started doing, first myself, then with Tyler, and then we started suggesting it to clients, is very much have coffee, add in some cases a little bit of glucose. Insulin sensitive, lean individuals who are training for long bouts of time. For example, people who are doing powerlifting who are already lean, or in the case of Bob, for example, add a bunch of salt to it. When I say bunch, of course, I mean measured. In most cases, it would be between 1 to 2 grams. Add that to coffee. And this was a tip from Tyler. At first, I had my shot of sodium before the coffee, but because I wasn't really keen on mixing salt with coffee. But Tyler suggested it once, and I've been doing it for years now, adding the actual salt or the sodium or low salt, if you get it in the States, to the coffee, takes out a bit of the bitterness of coffee. So it's sort of an acquired taste. But yeah, that was very much the recipe. You get it. And of course, for some people, you may also add a little bit of whey, like protein. So you get like a salty coffee chocolate concoction that it tastes great and actually does, the magic of getting electrolytes, hydration, some protein when you're training. Basically, it does everything. But of course, I understand that some people may not need either the protein nor the extra glucose because they want an overall way to just get electrolytes when you're drinking. And then that's why we also have the Ketorade, what we call, which is the one you mentioned, right? It's just how I do it is sparkling water, a little bit of cucumber. I leave that to macerate one day before. I may add a little bit of mint leaves. And then, of course, I add the sodium, some potassium, and if you can get a hold of some magnesium in powder, which normally you will get in the States as
natural calm.
Yep, you have to be very careful with that because if you overdo it, first it sizzles a lot, so it can make everything spill out. Then some people don't tolerate the taste that well, and then it also can get you disaster paths. So you have to be very careful with the actual dosage. It's something that you first off, your body learns to adapt to it, and then you have to try it to see if you actually like it. The magnesium is the least important part of the equation. What you actually do need here, because magnesium, you can get magnesium pills and have that at any given time. It doesn't matter that much. But the sodium and potassium, they have to be replenished through the day. That's also one of the errors I would say that some people do when they start supplementing with electrolytes. They think that they should get all the electrolytes in one go. And what happens if you have, a spoonful of salt and you shot it?
Sodium is an enema.
Yeah, you're basically having a laxative or a colon lavative, which can be good to drop probably 5 pounds in 20 minutes, but that's not really the goal here, right? What you want is to actually replenish your electrolytes very much in a constant rate. So it's best to just have that drink and probably sip it all through the day. And it makes something that you're going to be actually wanting to drink because it's really refreshing.
In your investigations, because you guys created your own supplement for electrolytes, when did salt come out of favor? Why was salt vilified? And how can we convince all this, people that became aware of this health scene in the 80s that sodium is not that problematic?
So, it's funny. It really seems to be cult of personality more than actual clinical data that ever really justified. When we look at meta-analyses and data on sodium consumption, it really is clouded heavily by the quality of the diet that the person is consuming and the lifestyle that they're living. When those things are handled with regard to confounders and things like epidemiologic research, you find that sodium itself is not uniquely problematic to the human condition. In fact, we were playing around with math and saw that, normal human kidneys could excrete the amount of sodium, even upwards 12 to 15 grams in less than half an hour. The capacity of the human excretory system to process and handle electrolytes, among a host of other things too, is very, very simple, quite frankly. I mean, it's not even taxing. So this idea that it's taxing to the kidneys or taxing to the urinary system or whatever is
or that raises blood pressure.
Yeah, but that's a funny conversation too. What we actually see is when you look at all-cause mortality, which is probably the best general measure of whether there is in fact harm, you see that the trough of a U-shaped curve actually sits at around 4 to 6 grams per day of sodium consumption. Interestingly, we actually see the Western diet, the last couple of studies I've really looked at were somewhere around 6 to 8 grams that we're consuming per day. It starts to lend itself to a conversation that, as much as I was talking with some friends of mine that are big advocates of the protein leverage hypothesis, and I said, well, what travels with protein regularly? What do we usually put on meat for flavor? Usually salt. And I do find myself wondering if the salt leverage hypothesis may have some bearing in that protein leverage hypothesis as well. Not only is protein very satiating, you're adding salt to the mix for flavor because very few people like to eat steak with nothing on it, right? As much as I'm a weirdo who probably will and does, as long as it's got some good smokiness to it. But it's kind of amusing. You said, it raises blood pressure. That's true in about 7% of people. the amount of transient blood pressure increase that happens after sodium ingestion in 93-ish% of people, and the studies are a little varied on this, is somewhere on the order of about 5 to 10 points on either side, the systole or the diastole. They're not big swings. So in reality, for most people, especially those who are eating low carbohydrate, which tends to reduce blood pressure at face value, increasing sodium intake or increasing electrolyte intake just tends to move you a little bit closer to the baseline of where you were beforehand in the first place, right? For those 7 to 10-ish% of people, they're what we would refer to as sodium sensitive hypertensives or salt sensitive hypertensives. Those people probably don't need to be eating a low carb diet. And interestingly, there's some ongoing research that I've been told about in hushed whispers. So I can't really get into why I know it or if it'll ever see the light of day, but there is some research being done to try and look at genetic and epigenetic factors relating to those people and see if there is a thread of common ancestry or common genetic mutation or something that might be the causal factor for why they seem to be uniquely sensitive to sodium when the vast majority of people in the world are not.
To compound the problem, I read that one of the number one sources of salt in the American diet is bread. So, you're having insulin spikes, you're eating, increased amounts of sugar, you're eating a ton of processed junk with a ton of salt. Of course, you're going to push the limits on what your kidney can excrete or sustain. And then you flip, and let's say one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm going to start eating paleo, and you cut off all processed foods, and now you don't have a source of salt.
Here's the deal, and this is not more from a scientific point that Tyler already covered, but more from a socio-political changes in how we eat explanation. Humans have always, very much like a lot of animals, looked for sources of salt and sodium. Free animals, they look for salt deposits. Humans, even when they were using agriculture, when they were not really keen on processed foods, they always used salt, very much like spices, as a commodity. Romans were paid in salt. That's where the word salary comes from, right? So salt has always been a super important part of a human diet. Again, we don't get salt, adequate salt, we die. The thing is that now with the advent of overly processed foods, and now that most people really don't cook their foods, they just get it pre-made. What happens is that the salt is already factored in. If you actually look at the ingredients of most processed products, they are they have sodium or they are high in salt. Even Diet Coke has sodium in it, for God's sake, right? So again, like I said, you are over-consuming lots of processed foods. Well, of course, this is why it does make a reason for some governments to tell people to restrict their additional sodium intake. They're already at their limits. But if you change back to a paleo or keto diet that is whole food based, what you will find is that you need to go back and manually add that sodium. That's where you get the salt shakers again in your table, and not having the sodium and all the other electrolytes already factored in the food. Sodium has always had to be taken in addition. It's not something that you find normally just in natural food sources. Some vegetables and so on had them in higher quantities before, but nowadays it's a little bit difficult because there's also a problem that Rob Wolf actually talks a lot about, which is the depletion of soil. Soil right now, because of the processes we use to cultivate a lot of vegetables, has been depleted of a lot of nutrients. So now even if you get lots of vegetables that may be high in some nutrients, there may be devoid in some others. So it makes even a lot more sense to actually be watchful, especially of electrolytes.
What about potassium? Because you hear people being kind of scared of potassium being, giving you arrhythmias.
I think this is a favorite topic of Tyler.
So, this is the biggest challenge that I see is sodium and potassium exist in sort of a push-pull dynamic in a very similar way that you would see something like insulin and glucagon. They tend to exist collaboratively to do work. There's a reason that when you look at cell biology or physiology textbooks, you're brought up with this idea of the sodium potassium pump. They move things across a gradient because they operate in synergistic fashion with one another. And one of the biggest challenges is people want to go very high sodium and fear potassium. And they forget that, like, even the RDI, which is one standard deviation above that which is known for a healthy person to start developing clinical symptoms of an insufficiency of that particular food item or that particular new micronutrient. So it ain't exactly what I would call the gold standard. It's just the good enough standard. It's like the bronze medal. That RDI is only about 4.5%, depending on who you listen to, in terms of what they estimate as being the correct range there. And so people hear, oh, keto, you need to eat more electrolyte, you need to consume more electrolyte. So they go and they have 10 or 12 grams of salt per day or more. And then we look at their diet, and with the exception of maybe some avocado, what are they really getting? Maybe some red meat, maybe a handful of tree nuts that may have some potassium. What are they actually getting? I started looking at client data a while back for those who were willing to share it with me, and I took maybe 50 of our clients and started looking at them. And I was even looking intentionally at some that we had on more of an ancestral sort of a diet as opposed to just pure keto, and none of them are getting more than about 3 grams of potassium a day. And then they're wondering why they feel like turds and like, oh, well, I keep adding sodium and it just keeps getting worse. Well, that's because there are some unique concerns about potassium. Let's be completely candid, though. If you overconsume sodium, in all reality, you're just going to crap your pants. Like, that's the worst thing that's going to happen. Now, while an otherwise healthy person would need to consume 20 or 25 or 30 grams of elemental potassium at one sitting to even reach the LD50, we don't know if our kidneys are necessarily compromised if we haven't done a good job of having blood panels and really been checked out by a competent physician. We don't know if maybe there's an underlying genetic mutation that makes me very sensitive to huge increases or large increases in potassium. So there is this risk factor that we want to be careful with. We tell people all the time, I would much rather you get your potassium with intentional food choices, really being selective about the foods that you consume, maybe steering more towards leaner red meats because they tend to have more potassium in them, looking at vegetables that have potassium, looking to try and introduce other foods and, gasp even maybe some vegetable sources of potassium that aren't exactly what I would call keto friendly necessarily. You can work some of that in when you're leaner and you're more active and you're getting more exercise and movement throughout the day. Those are places I would really like to see that happen, but there's no reason to be afraid of potassium supplementation. Stupid potassium supplementation you should run away from, but quite frankly, stupid diet in general you should run away from. There's the scene from Scrubs where J.D. pages Dr. Cox to ask how much aspirin he's supposed to give somebody at the hospital, and Dr. Cox, in his normal fashion, says, you open her old mouth up and you just take a handful of them, throw them at her, and however many go down her mouth, that's the right dosage. It is adult extra strength Tylenol or whatever. And like, honestly, besides malpractice, you have to almost be willfully stupid to really have a problem with potassium supplementation if you're otherwise healthy. In a full view of what it is you're eating throughout the course of the day, you shouldn't just blindly be taking supplemental anything, quite frankly. It's one of the reasons when we built the product, there are really two ways, right, that you can deal with electrolytes. And this has kind of been an ongoing battle within the keto sphere for a while. The first is you can increase sodium intake, right? So you can run sodium intake 8, 9, 10, 12 grams of salt per day. That's been Steve Finney and Jeff Volek's approach for a long time. That's been Eric Westman's approach for a while. That's been a number of people's approaches, and it's something that I think is kind of that path of less potential harm. So in that whole landscape from you medical type people that first do no harm mantra, probably the safer path. Alternatively, you can actually decrease sodium requirement and increase potassium intake substantially, running at 6, 7, 8 grams a day. And you can make people feel amazing, especially if they haven't had, sufficient potassium over the course of their life. But then what happens if they realize that, hey, we're kind of wired for this. If some is good, more is better. It's what happens in the testosterone scene in the fitness community. That's what happens when people that think that they're physique athletes start injecting insulin because, ooh, I'm driving more anabolism, and then they die. That's what happens with pain medications. That's what happens with drug addictions and alcoholism and food addictions and all sorts of stuff. If some is good, then more must be better. So if you tell somebody, yeah, go supplement all the potassium you can supplement and you're going to get 7, 8, 9 grams, and they go, I feel amazing. I wonder what happens when I have 20 or even 30. Well, you die potentially. Your heart sort of stops beating. And I don't mean to be glib because that's legitimately happened to a few people every year for a long time, most of whom have other medical complications that cause the problem, but it doesn't mean that we should just ignore that altogether. And so, what I would say is it's important to really ask yourself which approach is the safest and the smartest approach. And I tend towards get your potassium from food as much as you can. Don't be afraid of supplementation where it makes sense, and get your sodium increased to the point that you feel better. That tends to be the path that we typically recommend for folks.
As a practitioner, I start with diet, and you should start with diet and then look at supplementation secondly. But I do see a lot of people that have lost a bunch of weight, or they are eating an unprocessed diet, or maybe some athletes. And you guys have been talking about electrolytes and how important they are for a very long time. And I kept finding myself recommending electrolytes, and you need to add electrolytes to your diet, or supplement with electrolytes. But goddamn, man, I couldn't find a fucking product that could click all the things that I wanted. It would either have no potassium, or it would have a bunch of B vitamins, or it would have, some iodine, or things that are completely unnecessary. And I want to specifically talk about iodine because I do work with a lot of people with hypothyroidism, and getting a bunch of iodine can make your Hashimoto's thyroiditis worse. So avoiding iodine is very important for people with autoimmune disease, especially if you're taking thyroid medication. Thyroid hormone is made with iodine. So you are taking iodine, you're supplemented with iodine if you're taking thyroid hormone. And then just reading into the literature, I found that the way thyroid hormone works is by going into the nucleus of the cell and activating sodium potassium pumps. So now if you're chronically dehydrated and you don't have that sodium and potassium to good levels, you're going to feel like crap. No matter, your hormone levels are going to look great. Your TSH is going to look great, but that's it. You're not activating the actual pump. So looking at all these different supplements, I couldn't find one that I could definitely say, this is the one that I want to recommend. Why did you guys go into making your own supplement?
So this is something we've harped on for years, and I'm just going to jump in with this one. We've harped on context for a long, long time to say that it's important that we not become zealots in general. And that's true for the paleo space or the overall ancestral community, for the keto and low carb community, for the vegan community. There's a smart and a dumb way to do all of that stuff, right? The answer is, if you're asking yourself often, is this blank friendly or blank approved? Is this paleo friendly? Is this keto friendly? Is this vegan approved? Like, chances are you're doing your diet in a shit fashion to begin with. Like, you shouldn't be asking those questions. Eat meat, eat vegetables, and let's move on, right? But the reality is, one of the things that comes out of context is choices. And the sole thing we wanted to do with this product was to make sure that people had choices. What I mean from that is, not only by taking the sugar out of the supplement, to your point, if they are convinced of the SGLT1 literature, right? If they are convinced that they need 5 to 10 grams of dextrose or glucose to really power through a long workout, like the TKD approach that Luis and I recommend for high performance athletes or those who are very fit, hey, guess what? It's really friggin' easy to add that shit right back into the product, right? I mean, let's be honest. It's the same kind of thing with respect to iodine supplementation. You can go take kelp capsules for iodine and fish oil, or you can, or use krill oil rather. You can go out there and you can take supplements to increase iodine. You can add table salt that's been iodized if you choose. You can go get a supplement from your physician or from an over-the-counter that is a true iodine supplement. if that's something that you need. But one of the choice issues there, and as somebody who is hypothyroid myself, and my wife is hypothyroid also, guess what? If you take the iodine out, you can always add it back, but you can't take it out when it's in its final version. Nobody's going to sit there with a microscope and a razor blade trying to cut out all the iodine, that they see bound to, to the compound. Like, that's just stupid. So by taking a minimalist approach, we actually give people a maximal capacity for choosing how they empower their own health, right?
And within the supplement industry, you often say like, if you don't have 10,000% of your daily intake, that's not a very good product. So they tend to add all of these different fillers. For example, again, B vitamins in your electrolytes. At a certain point, the only effect that they're having is making your P highlighter yellow.
I always tell people to actually do a little bit of research before using any supplement and ask themselves or the supplement company like 3 questions at least, right? When should you take it? Why should you take it? Like, do you actually need it? And the amount, right? The actual effective dosage that the supplement in question has, and the actual that you need. Because I normally get a lot of discussions recently with a friend about a supplement. He was, saying the classic, if I take this supplement, I feel much better and I can do way more reps. And he was, saying the benefits of the supplement, which I looked at it, and it was basically lots of vitamins. Half of them, which were A, D, E, and K. And you know what happens with those vitamins, right?
They bioaccumulate.
Exactly. And then he was having them first on an empty stomach before training. Those vitamins are liposoluble. If you don't have them with fat, they go directly through you for the most part. They were underdosed as well. So what was the reason why he was having just better results with the supplement? And it's very easy. It's called placebo, right? But he's keen on still using a supplement that costs him about $50 a month. Well, okay, more power to you. But again, that thing by itself is really not doing anything. Most supplements, like you said, they just add stuff because they actually want people that sadly are not really well informed. So they think, okay, I need creatine. Oh, this supplement has creatine. Oh, I heard somewhere that I also need vitamin B. Oh, this also has vitamin B, but they don't know which are the right versions of the compound, how much they actually need to take, when they need to take it, or with what to actually be effective. So again, this is, like you said, companies taking or trying to take advantage of people that just adding stuff to fill the product and trying to make a quick sell.
How do you guys select the ingredients for your electrolyte?
So on the one hand, it was actually something where, and by the way, for those of you that are really interested, you can just go to the website and see. One of the other things that we were really intentional about is we realized that this is a product of convenience and a product of relationship. Be completely transparent. You can make this yourself for cheaper, 100%. Because I know, because I did it for 18 months, and so did Luis. I have a pair of goggles and like lab gloves, and I have all the tools and implements and a milligram scale and a set of calibrated weights to make sure that everything is correct, because I'm that guy. I was scraping stuff back off onto like little wax paper to put it back into the container in the bag, and that was how I operated with this. And if your lifestyle affords that, that's great. If it doesn't, I tell people all the time, I never want you to have to choose between making your car payment or making your mortgage payment and buying a product or a service from us. Here's the recipe, go nuts. When we really stepped back and started asking ourselves, like, what sort of ingredients are really beneficial? It's really the chelations as much as the electrolyte compounds themselves. So for example, when we're looking at just the elemental sodium, the elemental magnesium, the elemental potassium, NaK and Mg, right? Like, they just do what they do, and there is no question. But the formulation of that compound, whether it's bound to citric acid, whether it's bound to malic acid, whether it's bound to glycine or whatever, like, those are things that we have to step back and ask ourselves, so what are those compounds in isolation doing for us? So we opted, after really contemplating, like, do we go with like sodium bicarb or something to try and add some buffering element or buffering effect? The truth of the matter is very, very few people are training hard and high enough to really get acidotic or to overwhelm their body's buffering capacity. So we weren't super worried about that. And also, when we talk about butt stuff, you get enough sodium bicarbonate in your diet in one dose and bad things happen to you. And since this is a product really aimed towards both, well, all three kind of lifestyle folks, endurance folks, and also power lifters, nobody wants to be at the bottom of a squat or on the farthest part of a trail and realize that all of a sudden that bicarb is kicking in and it's going to be a bad day when you come back and try and convince people you ran through a mud hole. Like that's just the reality of things, right? So we opted with just standard, effectively table salt. I'm going to use that term, and I realize it's got some pejorative connotation, but sodium chloride. The chief reason for it was chloride is itself an electrolyte, and we don't sometimes think about the implications of chloride in the diet. When we looked at potassium, we had a couple of different options as to which direction we went. We didn't really feel the need to throw more chloride in there, and potassium chloride has some funky sources. So we opted for a citrate. If for no other reason, it adds a little bit more tartness to the overall flavor than do some of the other formations of potassium. And then with magnesium, you got to be careful because if you use the rapid digesting stuff, that's the kind of stuff that you find in Epsom salts and that sort of stuff. And there's a reason that you use those when you're backed up. And so it's kind of walking that razor's edge wire. And there is some clinical data out there to support malic acid, which is the malate binding compound to the magnesium, that it actually has some benefit as like an ergogenic aid for performance. And since this was, from Luis and I's perspective, always a performance supplement first, in terms of just being able to push and power through our training, it just made the most sense to say, hey, even if it's wrong, it's at least neutral and it's probably slightly beneficial. So it was really kind of the decision making was very, very pragmatic. It wasn't, sitting around looking at, well, which one is going to be the least costly or the most costly? Because remember, we did this for 18 months with goggles and scrapers and stuff for ourselves. And when we pitched this idea, initially it was kind of met with, so many people have tried this and it's been terrible. And I'm like, well, that's because their formulations are crap. They've sold electrolyte supplements that are really nothing more than Kool-Aid with a fairy dusting of electrolytes in them. And well, no wonder it doesn't really work. And any benefit, to Luis's point, that people were seeing was probably just placebo, probably just convincing themselves that the product was mythically being better, doing better, whatever.
So when you guys presented this idea, what was like the breaking point where like, okay, so enough people was it the market, asking for the product, or was it just because you guys were just tired of people complaining about making their own supplement?
I just got tired of answering people that there's not a good supplement and you have to make it yourself. But
yeah, dude, and that was me. I kept bitching about that because there wasn't.
We had people actually doing the work and going all the trouble into making themselves electrolyte pills, getting the empty pills, mixing it out. It's like, that's going to take you probably 2-3 hours 1 week to do all, 50 pills or more. If you want to do it, more power to you. And then on the other hand, you had people that could not wrap in their head that 5 grams of sodium is not 5 grams of salt. Sodium is not salt. And then the same happens with potassium and so on and so forth. And then you have people that either were overdoing some of the amounts or underdoing them. Again, you can do it on your own if you have the information, if you have the time. But if you're someone who, has a spouse, children, are tracking macros, etc., well, this is just going to be the easiest way to solve it. And even if you say, but this is expensive, well, you're already spending $4 on a Monster drink. If you're doing keto, you can only get a black coffee, and paying $5 for a black coffee is insane. Or even again, if you compare it and not doing keto to an actual commercially available electrolyte supplement out there, the closest would be, or the one people will know more about is a Gatorade. To get a Gatorade, which normally would be about $2, I think, in the States for about a 32-ounce bottle, you would need at least 3 Gatorades to sort of meet our ingredients, the same amounts. And then you get that with about 100 grams of carbs. because each Gatorade is about 28 to 30 something grams of carbs. So imagine that. So you are getting lots of carbohydrates and sugars that really don't do anything, but maybe bloat you. You're not meeting the electrolyte recommendations that your body actually needs. So you're just drinking sugary water that you think it's healthy. When you put it first on a nutrition comparison and then on an actual cost per dose, it just makes sense to get the stuff here versus getting a Gatorade or three.
By the way, I don't think we've ever even said the name of the supplement you guys created. It's called Element, and it's pretty cool, very slick looking, and they're not lying. They have the ingredients right at the front of the box. So if you want to go ahead and pull out your Heisenberg glasses and start making it your own, you can do it. But there's two different versions. There's a raw unflavored, and then there's like a lemon lime.
Basically, this is for people who want something to add to water or sparkling water. And this for people who are outside of the States. I don't know if you ever got this seltz soda. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah.
You do remember because you lived in Mexico for a while. So
Correct.
we had this candy that was called seltz soda that came in small orange packages. So it's like a candy that once you place it in your mouth, it's like
Effervescence.
Exactly, like Alka-Seltzer, but it was actually a candy, and the flavor was very much like this. And I don't know, lots of kids loved it. I used to like it, and this very much has that ring to it. And the other one, which is the raw version, it doesn't really taste like anything but salt. This is great, for example, to add it to your coffee or any other non-flavored drink or whatever drink you want, so as to not make the citrus overpower the taste. Again, for any fruity or whatever drink, this is great. For any other beverages, this is the thing to go.
I wonder, have you guys tried the unflavored over food?
It actually makes a great mix for either a margarita. It's a margarita mixer. The one, of course, with lime flavored, and even with cucumber or jicama or even carrots if you are so inclined. Any fresh vegetable, even celery, you can dip it on the citrus flavored one, and it's great.
In the unflavored version, did you guys seek to do something that was like Whole30 approved and all that?
Yeah, so that was the big issue, or the big driver there, was we wanted to make sure that people who were trying to follow more of like a Whole30, or who may be very, very sensitive to sweeteners, or maybe even if it's psychosomatic, that really doesn't change the fact that we did. It's foolish of us to just say, hey, well, you don't get any then because you don't like the sweet flavor, right? Like, that's crazy. So the thought process was then, well, why don't we just do a raw product here? That was actually Rob's wife's idea, and it was a fantastic one. To just say, why don't we just make it simpler? Because we were literally scratching. We're like, do we do 2 flavors for people that don't like the lemon lime flavor? What do we do? She was like, why don't we just go the other direction and let them put it into whatever they want? So it's really, really good in like kettle and fire bone broth. Just toss it in to add a little bit more of a salty flavor there, and add some electrolytes to it. I use it in my coffee twice a day with this. This is probably when my cortisol levels are insane, but twice a day with these things called a coffee, I'll throw one into each coffee mug and just take it down that way. It's just a super convenient way to sneak salt on. The one of the challenges with it, the idea of food, is that 2 grams of the product on food would probably be pretty darn salty. Eventually, there has been a conversation with regard to like a bulk supplement version to potentially look at making it available as sort of like a food additive shaker, or something that you can try, like a really nice travel shaker. But that's not anything that's really been officially hammered out yet. So
how many of those do you guys recommend? Do you need like more electrolytes at the beginning of your keto or weight loss journey, or like I remember Rob wrote an article many years ago. It was like, okay, if you're a big guy, you need about 2 grams of fish oil. If you're a small guy, you need around 1 gram. If you don't know if you're big or small, please get off of this website. What is your recommendations?
Generally speaking, we're going to tell people I would never really consume more than 3 of these a day for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is, try as you might, all salt is going to have some element of stuff you don't really want, right? So contaminants and stuff. And people argue, oh, well, not the Himalayan stuff. It doesn't have heavy metals. And I smile and say, yeah, it's just got lithium. Like, that's totally better than having cadmium, right? Everything in life is about trade-off. And to some degree, if the predominance of your electrolyte consumption per day is in the form of our pouches, you're doing your diet wrong. And you really need to step back and really assess how it is that you're conducting your diet and really identify a way to try and do it better. I would not recommend 3. It's any more than 3, which is what's actually on the packaging and on the website as well. But it's largely just pragmatic and concern about your diet in general, much more than it is about, something bad is going to happen if you do, right? Nothing bad is necessarily going to happen. It's just not a really beneficial idea.
When do you guys take it? Do you guys just take it through the day, or so there is a little bit of like a cortisol response, whenever you start your day with like a little bit of salt, or some salt water, where you're helping your aldosterone system. Do you guys do anything in the morning? Do you guys feel some pep when you take it, or just through the day, however you're feeling?
So in my case, I only take the element before training. Why? Because it is something that I've done for the last 15 years or so. All my other sodium intake, I get from food and add it to food. And that's very much how I would suggest for most people. I think Tyler already said that we don't really see benefit. And even if we wanted people to buy this, and we become super millionaires because of everybody bought element, it doesn't make any sense to use more than 2 or 3 a day. Try to get your electrolytes from whole foods, a little bit of sodium here and there, and that's it. This is great for people who are active, who are starting a diet, who feel tired, but it's not something that you should be, going through 3 boxes of this amount. It doesn't make sense. We don't want that. You were saying about the salt shot in the morning. That's something we do suggest to our clients as a protocol when you start keto, or if you are feeling overly lethargic. And it's an old, I learned that as a classic bodybuilding trick. This is something from old school bodybuilders that we've done for years. Every day that you feel super lethargic, a great way to get things going is just to take a sodium shot. So it's the classic recipe just says get about a teaspoon worth of sodium or sea salt, preferably colored salt, because it has other minerals as well. A little bit of lime. Put it on a shot glass, on a caballito, on the classic caballito, pretend it's tequila and shot it. Water, a little bit of lime, a little bit of Himalayan salt, shot it, do it on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and then report back. Most people, the ones that don't puke or whatever, report that they actually feel great and energetic. And even though I myself don't do it on a daily basis, when I feel, very tired, like I'm dragging my feet off the ground, that really picks me up.
I started thinking about all the people that are drinking like RO water, because they want to get like the cleanest water they can get. So they go with the reverse osmosis water, which is depleted of all minerals. There's a really good paper by the WHO that says basically, okay, so number 1, drink clean water. So don't drink water that is infected with, with anything. Number 2, try not to drink RO water. But if that's the only choice for good water, that's what you drink. But secondly, try to avoid RO water because you are depleting electrolytes. And I see so many people, my practice, that are chronically dehydrated, whether they don't like the taste of water or maybe they drink RO water. And, sometimes I wake up and if I feel like crap, I just go in front of my water, filter and I start drinking water until I feel better. And automatically, you feel better. And it has to do with a little bit of like replenishing the some of the electrolytes and getting some of that osmotic pressure to work for you, not against you. I really want to emphasize that I have no affiliation with any supplement for a reason, okay? Because I want to be able to call people out. And I can tell you guys that just talking to you and you guys telling me you don't need this fucking product, you can make it yourself. It makes me feel like this is something that I can truly recommend because eating in this very limited processed food, and being electrolyte depleted because exercise, because you're not getting sodium from processed foods, because of soil depletion, I feel really confident that most people that are starting on their journey for health would definitely benefit from taking electrolytes. And if they're lazy like me, getting a box of Element and maybe starting your day with that, or just before you work out having it, would be really, really beneficial. So guys, thank you for making this product. You guys really filled a gap that was definitely missing.
It means a lot to hear you say that, because that was really our whole focus and our whole purpose, was trying to serve a clear need. One of the issues that I think we've all seen in this space, it happened in the paleo space, Guillermo, several years ago, and it's happened in the keto space quite a bit in the last year or two, is everybody's got a product for a problem that doesn't actually exist. This is a very clear and present problem that we see in our community every day, probably 5 to 10 times a day. I feel like crap. Why has my performance gone down the crap? Or, there's no lead in the proverbial pencil. There's this, there's that. There's always, and it always comes back to one of two things. Either your macros are garbage or your diet is trash. You're eating nothing but, tossed buns off of McDonald's cheeseburgers and wondering why things are not going well for you. Or your electrolyte intake is you're guessing. And because you're guessing, here's the funny thing. When you're well and you've been well for a while, you learn to get a pulse for what it feels like to feel good. And when you start to feel bad, you can lick the wind and put your thumb up and feel the wind and go, it's that direction today. I need to add a little more. I need to add a little less. And over the years, to be completely transparent, Luis and I can do that. To some degree, he and I both can just look at our schedule for the day, look at what we ate the day or 2 days before, and just know the consequences of those things. For example, if we go out and we have some drinks with friends, what's a big thing we need to be doing that night before we go to bed, and then again in the morning? We need to introduce electrolytes and fluid.
For those that actually drink, this is a great hangover cure. No, for real.
It was kind of the thought process is, we've been pushed for a while. Oh, we all should come up with products. And the reality is, I dislike product whores in general, because they cease being the people they used to be. We've all been around multi-level marketing programs and people when the person that you really want to spend time with now sees you as a sales target in every conversation. Oh, marriage is falling apart? Well, that's tough. Have you tried It Works? Oh, your penis fell off in a horrible tragic accident. Have you tried our wraps? Have you tried the magic of ketones? Have you tried paleo bread? Have you tried it's always a sales pitch. And unfortunately, that's one of those things that Rob and Luis and I literally sat around chatting about, was how do we put this out there in a way that is completely transparent, to the point that if you look at the back of that box that Luis is holding, you'll actually see that we list 2 grams of carbohydrate. That's a citric acid. It is technically a carbohydrate in that CH2O model. We don't have to legally disclose that is technically a carbohydrate, but in the interest of transparency, we wanted to be completely transparent. So this is either the best or the worst business marketing model in the history of mankind. Here's the recipe. You can make it yourself at home. But the truth of the matter is, we're doing the research, we're simplifying and trying to make it super, super approachable to get electrolytes in a dietary strategy in that lower carb paleo or that ketogenic space where there is a huge need. And we're simply saying, here it is. Help us, support us in this so that we can continue to push this message forward, and we can continue to do the research and the life-changing stuff that we've been blessed with the opportunity to do. And so hearing feedback that is like an echo of what we said around 18 months ago, talking about at a table at Rob's house, it's really refreshing to hear. So I have to say, just complete transparency, because I don't pull a lot of punches. That means a lot to us both.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to have this go-to, because I find myself, talking about electrolytes a lot, and I had nowhere to send people. So fantastic. So guys, what are you guys up to? What are some next couple of conferences or things? How are things going?
Busy as all.
We'll be in Denver in a few weeks for Low Carb Denver, March 7th to the 10th. Then we'll be at FitCon Utah in April 11 and 12. Then we'll be in Austin for Paleo FX. That's by the end of April. That's 23 to 25 or 26, I think.
25th to the 28th. And just a little add-on there, we will actually be at the Primal Health Coaches Retreat just before Paleo FX.
Mm-hmm.
So for your audience members who are Primal Health coaches or have interest there, definitely check that out. Super not cheap, but when you're bringing in the caliber of speakers that Sisson and crew are bringing in to talk about building your business and growing your business in a way that isn't schleppy and really is approaching people at their moment of need with compassion and care, that is something that I really think would be beneficial and worthwhile for people to do as well.
Are you guys speaking at PFX?
Maybe yes, maybe not. I have to do the classic submission, but I haven't heard back. So if not, we can talk whenever, and we're just surely going to have element there with some low carb margaritas.
Yeah, if you're folks mind, let us know. And at PaleoFX, we will allegedly be having a little margarita mixer at the table. So as long as Keith and Michelle don't block us there. If not, we'll have to repeat Salt Lick, and we'll just make a couple of gallons and do some stuff out there. So
why don't we put it out there for anyone that's coming to PFX? Why don't we do a meetup and we go to Salt Lake either before or after the conference, and we just I don't know, deplete a couple of tons of meat.
Just call them ahead of time and let them know that we're coming, right?
Yeah.
Circling back, we will be speaking at FitCon. We will be doing a poster presentation and leading a movement seminar or a movement symposia, if you will, all of the days of Low Carb Denver. So find us. We'll have salt at PFX and FitCon. We'll have a 20-foot table, so we'll be hard to miss. Come try a drink, chat with us, ask us questions, challenge Luis to arm wrestle, whatever it is that suits your fancy. Challenge Rob to a roll.
Or challenge Tyler on the ARX machine if they have them at PFX this year.
If you're going to challenge me to anything, it should probably be chicken wing eating, because that's pretty much the gold standard that is me. But yeah, so that's where I think we'll be. I don't think we've got anything scheduled after that at this point, but I could be.
I heard some rumors that you might be making it to AHS.
That's the game plan, but we're going to kind of slum it up and just hang out and get to know folks there and check it out this year. So heading back out Cali way again. I'm surprised I don't catch fire with my libertarian self every time I fly into California.
Well, thank you for being here. You know, I love all the work that you guys put into this. I love how much you care about your about the people that follow you, and I love your honesty. And really, you know, this is super informational. This is like I hate calling it a biohack, but this is like what a biohack should be. Actual physiological reasoning behind adding something to your diet that you're missing because of your diet. So thanks for all the work that you put into this, and I can't wait to hang out with you guys at all these crazy conferences.
Awesome. See you later. Thanks, Guillermo.
Awesome, dude. Thank you, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Likewise. Bye. Thank you.